I'm Various Artists, host of the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast and blog, where I revisit every live show I have seen. Now, in this offshoot video series, My Life in Conversation, I interview creatives from all areas of the arts, and today I'm speaking with author Bob Klanac about his book, Promo Man, Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle. There we are. Now, Bob's book chronicles the incredible life and career of PR legend Nick Panaseiko. Now, Nick entered the world of music and PR as a teenager here in London, Ontario, Canada, starting off by producing a successful local legendary show by the Supremes in 1965 while he was still a teenager. Now, in the process, he launched an incredible PR and promotions career that spread to Toronto and throughout Southern Ontario and Canada in the 60s through the 80s, with his involvement in music even continuing on from there. So also his impact on the local scene and its musicians is incalculable, from supporting and promoting various local musicians and events, along with opening clubs of his own, such as The Image on Richmond Street in the late 1960s. In the course of his career, he's worked with a dizzying array of artists from a wide variety of genres, from Liberace through the Rolling Stones, Rush, Blondie, and many more, utilizing his relentless energy, talent, and imagination to help build and promote the careers of many, many classic acts. So I'm here today with Bob to discuss this must-read book, to discuss Nick's incredible career with all of its twists and turns. So, hi, Bob. Thanks for taking the time to stop by and discuss the book.
Thank you, Brent. I very much appreciate it.
Okay.
And yes, It's a wonderful life he had. It still has.
Still has.
Yeah,
Still has.
He's still with us.
So I'd like to start by having you let listeners know more about Nick Panaseiko. I just gave that introduction. Who he is and why he is so important, not only to the London, Ontario music world, but Toronto and beyond. Why is Nick important?
Well, Nick, I'd say Nick is important because the title of this book is Promo Man, and he really was the first promo man. Up till the time that he went to Quality Records, right around that time, there was, for each record label, and there weren't many, there was Quality Records, and which handled a lot of American labels, American record companies, except for perhaps Warner's and maybe Sony. So they had everything else. They would have a marketing department and sales, but that was it. They didn't have anyone doing promotions, that sort of thing. But they needed it because they wanted to sort of let their, as rock and roll sort of took hold in the late 60s and early 70s, it became necessary to kind of let the labels know in the U.S. from their Canadian branches, that they're handling their artists well. So Nick's success in breaking Kiss in Canada through a radio station in Windsor, that got him the eye of Gene Liu at Quality Records, who hired him as their first promotion man. So, nice. Yeah, that's why I think he's important. He was the first one to do it, and he did it well. Mm-hmm. Their job was to get headlines and to get attention, and it was freewheeling. They had bosses, but all their job description was pretty simple. Do promotions based on these acts that sometimes will be come to town and sometimes will be come to town just for a press tour. So that was it. And so they had all the freedom in the world.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting too, because you mentioned that about Kiss, because there's also the aspect that when Kiss first played here in the summer of '74, he added Rush to the bill, who were sort of an upcoming band, and that in itself kind of helped launch Rush's career because Kiss sort of took them under their wing.
That's true. Yes, they really hit it off, the two bands, and so Kiss was looking for an opener for their U.S. tour, a strong opener, and Rush were eager to go to the U.S. market because only a few years before they were playing high schools, high school auditoriums, and dances and that sort of stuff. So this was kind of their ticket to the big time, and they really never went back.
Yeah.
So it was kind of much a very lucky thing for both bands.
Yeah. You were mentioning too, you brought up a few bands there. I guess one question I'll ask before I move on to that is when did you first become aware of Nick?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I used to write for a magazine, a local arts magazine in London here, and I was doing an article that focused on kind of the history of London music, and which I later called The History of London Music cut down to 1,200 words because that was my time. But everyone I interviewed for that article kept asking me, have you talked to Nick Panaseiko yet? Have you talked to Nick Panaseiko yet? And I'm going, no, but I will. And I did. And that's when I kind of got an idea, but only an idea of what he was about in terms of London. And then he went off to somewhere overseas for a while, and then he came back, and then we connected. I was working at the Home County Festival. I was a chair for a while, and we kind of saw each other and went, "Hey, good to see you again," because we knew of each other. And then it just sort of went from there. We started talking, and he wanted to do a book about his life, and I said, these are great stories. I like to do that.
Now, again, you mentioned that the great stories from his career. When reading the book, it's almost like he had a Zelig-like ability to be in the right place at the right time with the right people. And just going through the book, looking at the images and the pictures of everyone there, it's just everyone. It's just bizarre because he interacted with almost everyone.
I just opened the book to this picture here. This is a picture of him with Pierre Trudeau. And you ask yourself, how did he get in a picture with Pierre Trudeau? And people were asking that question, going, who is this guy?
So how did he end up in that picture?
Well, this goes into his friendship with John Rowlands, the rock and roll photographer who shot everyone from the early Beatles to Lady Gaga. And in '75, like Nick had someone when Nick went to Quality Records. There's a guy who was shooting photos for the label, but he kind of really hit it off with John, so he hired John on to do the job instead. And so John took him on all of his shoots. And so, in other words, John would bring him to his shoots for other artists, and also, other events he was shooting. And I guess John was covering this reception for the Prime Minister, and so there's Nick Panaseiko in there, and with the Prime Minister of Canada, and it was kind of like the Zelig thing is absolutely a good description. It was kind of funny when I look at it and laugh, going, because people were asking, who the hell is this guy? Why is he everywhere?
And it was the John Rowlands connection, the John Rowlands connection.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to that with John Rowlands and some of the photography.
Yeah.
But I want to explore a little bit more, again, this sort of Zelig-like ability that you go through like different periods and different decades, and he seemed to be right in the middle of everything. And there's a couple of stories and people in the book I would like to point out and have you talk about a little bit. One I alluded to in the intro, and that was the Supremes concert here in January of 1965, which is legendary. And I mean, that's a show that many people even today will talk about when they came up from Detroit. For those who don't know the geography, that's about 2 hours south of London. We're pretty close. But I knew of this gig. I actually knew someone who was backstage at that show, but in reading your book, I didn't know kind of the story behind it and how that show came to be. Could you talk a little bit about that show, how that came about, and sort of what happened? Because it's really quite funny.
Well, yeah, he wanted to do a concert with a major artist before he was 18. That was his, he handled a lot of booking a lot of bands in London and areas around London. And so he set on bringing in, what was his name? Gene
Gene
Pitney.
Pitney.
Yes. And so Gene Pitney's, concert was booked, and then Gene Pitney got big, and so they kind of clawed back the contract and said he can't do it anymore. So then he reached out. He was looking at the Temptations at one point. That almost happened. Then somehow it flipped over to the Supremes. So anyway, so the Supremes show, it's at this facility in London that is now torn down. I think the capacity was 2,000. He sold it out.
I thought it was at the Gardens.
No, not the one down by the 401.
Oh, it was the London Arena.
London Arena, yes, which is right downtown, or was rather.
Blocks from where I live.
Yes, exactly. Right. You're right. So anyway, so that's all set. And then, it was this is Canada, just as with one of those Kiss stories, it was a snowy night and they're kind of waiting for the band to come in, and they've got a backup band for the Supremes to play the music. And they were called Johnny and the Canadians. So if you do a little bit of Googling, you'll find out who they were. They had a couple of hits. Anyway, they show up and the band is and with charts, and the band is going, charts. We don't know charts, and so it was last minute, and the place is full. So basically, the Supremes lip synced to their own records, and that's how they did it, and no one was the wiser, because it was the Supremes doing their thing. And if you look in the book, there's some pictures in there of them on stage and with different people. But that was it. But there's actually an interesting coda to this. Nick, as I said, was 17, and some of the local powers that be in the music industry at the time said, "You're too young to do this." And he said, "Am I?" And they went, "Yes." And they called the union, and they had him sort of shut out of doing shows in London, that sort of thing. So that didn't. Nick had to do. No one's going to stop Nick. So he kept on booking bands in places outside, like Grand Bend. He'd bring in Ronnie Hawkins. Ronnie Hawkins,
and was that when it was with the Hawks?
Oh yes, exactly. And he'd bring in lots of bands to areas outside of London, and that's covered off in the book as well. And then when he turned 18, well, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Because
there was that, and you also mentioned, well, there's a few stories in there about Kiss, and early on in their career, they actually really developed an audience here in London, and they played several times. And you mentioned the one about the snowstorm where they did. I remember people going to that concert. I wasn't there, but the one at Christmas, the second show where it was a blizzard, and basically by the time they got on stage, half the audience was gone.
Well, yeah, because all the parents' kids were outside honking their horns. It's 10 o'clock. You guys should be done, but Kiss was late, and so some of the kids had to leave.
Yeah. But the story that I thought was even funnier, I think it was the next time they came, was them, especially like Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, down by Fanshawe, Fanshawe Creek, Fanshawe River, sort of fishing, just completely confusing all the families and everyone who was there.
Yes, because who else is wearing like snakeskin boots around the river there? And well, there's two things. Well, they were playing Toronto. They were playing Toronto, and then Nick, they had a day off, and they wanted to go do something, and so Nick brought him back to London, just simply that's where he's from, and it was just right after the Toronto gig in October of '76. And they went and played baseball. And a couple of the guys in the band went to play baseball. A couple others got some fishing rods and went down to Fanshawe Dam and did some fishing. But they're not wearing makeup, so quite frankly, no one's the wiser.
Yeah, but it's still, I think in there, it's like, who are these people? Because didn't they take a limousine down to the fan? Basically, It's a creek.
Yes, they did. Exactly. They brought it. It's like, who are these guys in limousines? Snakeskin boots, but yeah. You
gotta love the 70s.
Like, yes.
I think all of us were really lucky to live through that time.
I think so.
Yeah. Another one in there too that was incredible was his involvement in the Rolling Stones
Yes.
playing the Alma combo with Keith Richards' Drug Bust, where essentially he was Marlon Richards' nanny
Yeah.
for like a day or so. Can you talk a little bit about how he came to be involved with that
Well,
legendary?
yeah. So there's a couple different levels of his involvement, and it's and one was, which of course, if you're a promo man, it's other duties as assigned. Now, the one of those was someone was handling. What do you do for a guy who gets busted for heroin? You get him more heroin because, quite frankly, he's still addicted. And so someone else was tasked with that, and that's kind of covered off in the book. And Nick's gig was to find a connection for cocaine, and so he did. And he set up this thing where someone would go to an address up on Spadina Road and basically leave some money under the guy's mat and come back later that day, and there'd be some cocaine in an envelope. And then also, they would be up at the Harbor Castle Hilton fairly often, and that's when he met Marlon Richards and saw, this poor kid is kind of playing. He's got some sort of a game or something. So Nick played the game with him because he felt sorry for the kid. Nick had a son probably around Marlon's age at home at the time, and he became just played the games with him. And I think at one point also they took him out to see a magician at a theater on Yonge Street, and
Right.
right.
And didn't they all go? And like Anita Pallenberg was there and everything.
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't get Keith up, so it was Keith Richards up. So they got up, and Anita Pallenberg goes in, and she gets it together. Marlon was there, and Anita at one point, kind of they're in the theater. They come in late to start with to this the Great Ravine, I think his name was.
Oh yeah, I've got a Ravine poster.
Great. So anyway, they brought this. So they're just down the aisle from. They go in, and then at one point Anita says rather loudly, "Hey Nick, do you want some Coke?" And she stole Ronnie Wood's kind of skull, Coke spoon from the room before she left. And Nick's going, "No, be quiet," right? Because Anita was kind of a mess, and so that was once again other duties as assigned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that I thought was really interesting in the book was some of Nick's sort of entertainment enterprises, in particular, his club, The Image on Richmond Street, which I never knew about. It was just kind of before I was kind of aware of that stuff. And it was really fascinating to find out about this club, where it was. And Jimmy Ruffin played there, and there's pictures of him playing.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about Nick opening that club up and what that was all about?
Yeah, well, basically, I think he wanted to open a club, and he met, and then there's this guy named Ken Faircloth, who he's still friends with. Nick's still friends with everyone he worked with back in the day because Nick's a very kind of affable, good guy, and Ken basically said, "Yeah, I'll help you put up some money for it," because Ken had a day job working at the downtown mall, kind of like in a men's haberdashery. So he was doing okay. And so they opened up this club, and they did a lot of work on inside the club, and so he started booking acts. And of course, one of the constant things was music and musicians coming down from Detroit. And so sort of that kind of happened a fair bit. What's his name as well? Mitch Ryder. Well, they did a concert with Mitch Ryder while he owned the club too. But I think Mitch Ryder played there once, and it was a nice little club, and it did okay. Yeah, there's some kind of funny stories because there's a band called Motherload back in the day who had a hit with and When I Die, and they wrote that when they were kind of the house band at The Image for a while. And there's also a funny story about.
Is that the Laura Nero song?
No, it isn't. You're thinking. I know the song you're thinking of. It's a different one, but that's what initially I get the.
Oh, I know. I remember. Yeah, I remember that song. Yeah, I remember. I'd forgotten. I know the one you're talking about now. Yeah,
very catchy song. But anyway, so and also on the top floor they rented out. They rented out this guy named Fred Smith, who's still around London, does a great show on country music on CHW, and basically because Motherload would practice, that was their rehearsal space. On the one floor below, and basically because it was so loud, Fred Fred, they reduced Fred's rent to nothing because it was so loud. And yes, anyway, so the club kept going until finally the people who owned the building kind of said, we want it back. And so they, yeah, that was it. Apparently, because they put so much work into it, they trashed not the actual interiors, but they did a lot of stuff like with black lights and different kind of things. So they kind of got rid of all that stuff on their final night at the club. So, yeah.
Okay. So now you were mentioning earlier how you came to know Nick, and he's been around. I just recently found out that I was in a photograph with him, with Marianne Faithfull and a few other people in 1989. And at the time, I didn't know who he was. Now I look at the photo. Wait a minute, that's Nick Panaseiko. So as you were saying, he was connected to a lot of people here in the city. Now, when you started writing the book, of course, you would be interviewing Nick, but you interviewed a lot of other people, his peers, people he worked with. Talk a little bit about the interview process, maybe some of the people you talked to, and a bit about that.
Yeah, there was one thing. Nick convened this meeting. We kind of found a front room in a bar here in London, and we got about 10 or 11 or 12 people who were his peers of the day, musicians, mainly musicians and such. And of course, you look at them now, and they all look like respectable citizens. But when they talk about this stuff, they're talking about, it's all teenager stuff. When they were teenagers, everyone had to be in a band. Everyone wanted to be in a band, and everyone wanted to find an instrument, and in some cases even make an instrument, or borrow them from police bands or from the high schools, and then kind of cover up the numbers on the instruments. So if their teachers came by to see the bands, they wouldn't know it was the high school stuff. So everyone wanted a guitar and such. So anyway, these guys talked all about their times and about working with Nick and that sort of thing. So it was really, really good. But at one point, I decided that I didn't want many more voices. Those were good voices because they brought in different points of view about the times in London. But with very few exceptions, I didn't want to talk to any other people other than John Rowlands, which I did, and also the guy who introduced the Rolling Stones at the Oshawa concert, Cliff Lorimer, because Cliff had an interesting point of view as well. But I kind of wanted to make it focused on the point of view of Nick, because sometimes you get slightly contradicting stories, and all I did was research the actual facts of what happened when. Talk to Nick for his opinion, and sometimes I'd say, well, this actually happened then. We'll kind of go, oh yes, then or there. So that was about it. I wanted this almost like Nick's life according to him.
Okay. So, now, you mentioned John Rowlands. You mentioned him a few times, and there's a big personal and professional interaction, a connection there, and they've worked together for years. Can you talk a little bit about John Rowlands, who he is, and his importance? There's sort of symbiotic relationship in terms of their careers helping each other out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I mentioned some of this, but it's interesting. To this day, they both say of each other, we've never had an argument in our entire friendship. Wow. Not once. They get along so well, and they really are kind of good guys in that way, good people. Yeah, I think it was really good for Nick because he liked John. He liked John's attitude and his personality, and they worked well together. And then, John, as I say, he had a separate but overlapping career where he did the stuff for Nick, and then he also, when Nick went to work for the inn up in northern Ontario, I can't. My God, it's escaped my memory. But anyway, John, he hired John to go up there and shoot all the photos up there as well for the musicians and such. So John, as I say, he's had an interesting career, and I'm doing a book on John now, and I hope to have it out by the middle of next year. So
I was going to ask you about that as well.
Yeah. I'm just basically going through and editing the first series of interviews, and then we're going to go back at John with a few more, and then get it out by next spring, summer.
Cool.
So, John's
So is Promo Man your first? I know you've done a lot of writing about music. Was this your first book, full-length book?
Yeah, it is. It was, yes. And it was great. It was a wonderful process. And you kind of like, I pitched it to some different publishers, and I got some interesting nibbles, but ultimately Nick is an older person. I wanted to get this book out as soon as I can. Nick's health has seemed fine. He's got Parkinson's. That's in the book. But, I just wanted to get it out sooner than later.
Yeah.
And so, but what I did, though, is I basically got professional people to help me, from the cover designer, a woman with 40 years plus experience designing graphics, Abby Trowell. And then Ian Gillespie was the editor. Ian's a longtime London Free Press editor and writer in his own right. And he was very helpful in editing the book. So it's just, you can easily do this now. It's not just hire professionals, though. And, get outside voices in there and that sort of thing. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, as we talked about, Nick really started promoting bigger shows in the 60s through the 70s and early 80s. And then eventually he got out of the PR game. Why did he get out of the PR game?
That's touched on the book. I think basically he was getting a little worn out. I mean, it really is a young man's game or young woman's game now, because there are women doing the job as well. But also, so he got out simply for that reason. And so it was just the pace. He was trying to be home be around for his son and doing that whole thing, going home weekends and that sort of thing. So it's, I think it just kind of got to be a little too much. 5 years of doing that in that go environment was kind of trying. So he got out of working for those labels, and he went to work for, oddly enough, a kind of a Christian label.
Yeah, Word.
Fascinating project, Word. Yeah, and no, we're not trying to talk hip here. That was the name of the label. It's Word Records. And he wanted to, their goal was get these Word Records and these kind of Christian music into the regular record racks and not just, religious bookstores and stuff. So that was his goal, and he did that.
Yeah, because, those years, especially once he got hired by the major labels, I was just reading this, and the fact that most of the time he still was centered here in London. I'm thinking, when did you sleep?
Yeah.
Because it's just relentless.
It was. He even missed the second, for the Stones El Macombo shows, he missed the second night because he wanted to go home for the weekend, for be with his family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, having read the book, doing the interviews with Nick, and also with some of his peers, what do you feel that you learned about Nick? What do you feel his legacy is?
Well, his legacy is as a major contributor to the development of music in London, Ontario. He helped a lot of things happen. In fact, one of the things that comes up is musicians will constantly say, oh yeah, Nick got me this gig, or Nick did this. He helped to develop people's careers. And that's a lasting contribution. Also, just in terms of being the first to do it, being a promo man, being the first, if not one of the first, to do this. And also, I think having this exist in London, Ontario, we were named a UNESCO Music City. And I think it's an important part of filling out the legacy of why that is. It's we deserve that reputation, but there really hasn't been much evidence now. So I think this book is one contribution to it. It focuses on Nick, though, and then another fellow named Jim Chapman just did an exhaustive book looking at all the bands in London, Ontario in the '60s. So I'm glad this history exists now. I'm glad it just went beyond anecdotes, because a lot of stories, rock and roll stories, as you know, are anecdotal, and they're not really written down anywhere. So yeah. I think Nick's contribution to London and to Canadian music it exists now in some sort of a form. And quite frankly, it's on Amazon. It'll be on Amazon long after I'm gone, because it's just the way Amazon works. It'll always be for sale and available. And at some point, when people read things, I think it sometimes encourages them. One thing I've gotten from a lot of people is, I had no idea, A, that this happened in London, Ontario, or B, who this guy was. But as you said, Zelig, and also as I put it in the introduction of the book, you're not supposed to know who he is. He's a behind the scenes guy. His name isn't supposed to be, ubiquitous. He's supposed to be one of those people that kind of was pushing the artist constantly. So
what you were just saying there, because when I was reading the book, and as you know, I'm a tune head and also very interested in kind of like the local history, but there's a pile of stuff in here I did not know about. Yeah. So I learned a lot. So if I'm learning a lot, then there's a lot to learn. And it kind of captures his story, but it also captures not just a place in time, but various places in time, because it spans the decades.
Well, yeah, it does. I have very little ego about this, and so I let people tell me something, but I'm comfortable now saying that this is a really entertaining read. Everyone says, "Oh my God, it's a fun read," and I kind of did it that way because it should be a fun read. He had a fun life, and it's full of kind of stories that kind of bump in and bump out, and you kind of go, wow. And it should read like a careening kind of story, It's I've read other books, and it's kind of laid out in a certain pattern, but no one has an obligation to read anything you write. But once you start this book, it really is kind of hard to put down, because it's and I owe a lot of that to Ian Gillespie, my editor, who was the one who kind of said, Bob, you open up a book about rock and roll stories, you want to read rock and roll stories. You don't want to read about a Ukrainian immigrant story, which is, in fact, part of it. It's in there, but I kind of moved the thing around. So I think it's a much better read. And
it was I read this in about a day. I think I couldn't put it down, because it really is. And it's like every page, it's like, okay, now there's this band and there's that band, and so it's really quite something. Again, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's saying something, because you know a lot. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. This was, again, too, I think this is also very essential, because this is one of the things now that I'm older, and I was in Ottawa for 20 years and I've moved back. Yeah. And one of the things, and I've talked about this with a lot of other people sort of my age who are part of like the underground music scene, and that is, back in the day, it was always, London, we don't get this, we didn't get that, because, Toronto was so, 2 hours away. Mm-hmm. Now, when I look back, it's like, oh my God, we had so much here. We had a completely sustainable, sort of music system. We had so many acts coming in. Now I see like, oh my God, how lucky I was. And I know a lot of people who feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. I picked up on that. I mean, I came to London in about 84, 85. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Thunder Bay. But I really have picked up on kind of what was going on by the late 80s, and just in terms of what was happening. I was volunteered at the radio station too while I was working at West, and so I ended up picking up on some of that. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, this city continued to have a pretty dynamic scene. There's people in it like Dave and Rena, who are crucial. Yes, What Wave Dave, and just in O'Halloran, and just in terms of documenting what happened.
Yeah,
it's.
And I find in the last couple of years since COVID, like the downtown music scene, we have far fewer places to play, but it's really been re-energized. Mm-hmm. And you have, a lot of the bands, and some of the bands coming back. We have the Wabi Sabis, which is basically a sort of a London punk rock all-stars and that. So it really seems there's been a new burst of energy at all different levels in the music community here, even if we have fewer venues for artists to play in.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of one of those things. You start to sort of find different venues, to do things. I've noticed that people are kind of saying, "Well, you should try this space or try that space." So the spirit is there, I think some of Call the Office's influence has been split between, the Palisade North and also Grumrunners,
and the Richmond.
And the Richmond, of
the
course.
Richmond's a huge draw for music. I mean, that's kind of almost the heart of downtown.
That's kind of happening like more recently in the last year or so. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So it'll always find a way.
Yeah. Well, necessity is the mother of invention. So
there we go. We've got all the quotes, don't we?
All right. Well, the book is Promo Man, Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle. The author is Bob Klanac. Buy. It is truly entertaining. Like once you get going, you can't put it down. You're laughing. You're sort of really, and just so much stuff. So I highly recommend it. Thanks, Bob, so much for dropping by. Looking forward
welcome.
to your book on John Rowlands.
Thank you. And by the way, you can get this on Amazon or at many London-based outlets, and also in Stratford and in Toronto at Sonic Boom. So whoever you're watching this, you can get a copy.
Great.
Okay. Thanks again, Brent. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for stopping by. All the best.
Yeah, you bet.